So, hi everybody. I'm Jose Godoy, and I'm trying to present you how we've been using genomes to help the conservation of a highly endangered species. This is the most endangered felid in the world once was, and thankfully it's no longer. It's been recovering. And well, the Iberian lynx genome has been one of the earliest genomes of an endangered species to be generated. We already presented preliminary results in the first biodiversity genomic conference in Washington a few years ago. And what I'm focusing today, well, then with that genome, we basically learned that the Iberian lynx was one of the most genetically eroded endangered species. In fact, the genome-wide diversity is among the lowest reported for any species, in fact. And we also detected high levels of recent inbreeding. So, but with this information in the last few years, we just wanted to get deeper into understanding how the decline of an endangered species affects the genome, and most importantly, how it affects the functional parts of the genome. So for that purpose, we use this reference genome to generate additional resequencing data for the two remnant populations of Iberian lynx, and also for several populations across the range of the Eurasian lynx, that it's a sister species of the Iberian lynx, but it's least concerned globally, although in the western part of its range has gone through dramatic declines and fragmentation in the last few centuries. So with this information, we were able to reconstruct the demographic history of the two species and select pairs of populations representing extremely eroded one, like in the Iberian lynx Doñana population, and compare it to not so bottleneck one in the case of Iberian lynx Andújar population. For the Eurasian lynx, we have Kirov as a non-bottleneck population, and Poland and Norway as highly bottleneck populations. So we decided to compare directly diversity within a non-bottleneck population and a closely related bottleneck population along the genome and across different genomic features. So for that purpose, we calculated this measure of the relative loss of diversity. That's simply the difference between the diversity in the bottleneck minus the diversity of the non-bottleneck relative to the sum. And we were using three pairwise comparisons that reflects different intensities of the bottleneck. The intensity is kind of reflected on the global loss of genetic diversity. Here, for example, Poland has 80% of the diversity of Kirov across the genome, while Norway has 74, and Doñana has about 50% of the diversity of Andújar. So when we compare this measure of relative diversity across features in increasing order of selective constraints, we see that while most neutral features are close to the average, genome average, the most selectively constrained, namely coding sequences and ultra-conserved non-coding elements, show in general less consistently in the three pairwise comparison, less diversity loss. So, and this pattern seems to exacerbate as the intensity of the bottleneck increases. So to the point that in ultra-conserved non-coding elements, we could observe higher diversity in the bottleneck than in non-bottleneck population. This seems to suggest that in bottleneck populations, drift is somehow interacting with selection in these functional and selectively constrained features, resulting in a relaxation of purifying selection that results in an accumulation of supposedly putatively deleterious variation. We wanted also to take a different look at this by counting the number of derived mutation per individual genome. That's a more proper measure of genetic load in individuals. So we did that in individuals for average across populations and species, And again, we compare the counts of derived mutations in putatively neutral regions of the genome, namely intergenic, and also in coding sequences, but this time annotating the functional impact of these mutations in missense tolerated, missense deleterious, and loss of function. So these are predicted to have a higher impact on the protein, so are predicted to be less deleterious. And we compare this average number of derived mutation across feature in different populations and species, and we observe that it's pretty similar across populations in both species for neutral and missense tolerated, so mutations of minor effect, but that the more deleterious mutations in the coding region, and especially those in that causes loss of function, are fewer in the Iberian lynx. So with these two, and we could attribute this to the effect of purging, so the selection against these highly deleterious mutations in the Iberian lynx that has been facilitated by their extremely low effective size across most of its history. So that has two important consequences. One is that this may have contributed to the persistence of a species despite such a low diversity, and also allows us to predict that the effects of inbreeding the patient will be somehow lower in the Iberian than in the Eurasian lynx. So with this, we gain, I think, a better understanding of these processes occurring in endangered species. The last, go back, this last study also generated a catalog of potentially deleterious mutations. And I think that the next step in the contribution of genomics to the conservation of this species should come through the identification of particular variants that are related to, reducing fitness in the population, some of them probably related to genetic diseases. One of particular concern is the juvenile idiopathic epilepsy that is segregating to relatively high frequencies in the captive population. We now know that the heritability of this disease is very high, and it also segregates as a Mendelian recessive character. So I think we have an opportunity to identify, if not causative mutation, at least variants linked to this. And if we incorporate this to the management, the ongoing management based on molecular markers, then we have a good opportunity to make a real impact from genomics in its conservation. This will be facilitated by a novel and a much improved reference genome for the species. So I end up here. I think I use up my time just by acknowledging most of the results I've been presenting are those of Maria and Daniel, Maria Lucero and Daniel Kleiman. And this has been also have acknowledged these many other collaborators and our funding agencies. So that's all. Thank you all for your attention.